Okay, so let's just jump in. It's 6:33 according to my clock. I want to thank everyone who's here now, and I guess Mike, if you can watch for people joining, and then maybe chat them directly, hit them up directly with a direct message, so they know they should answer, put their questions in the Q&A box of Zoom. I'd appreciate it. So this is our second monthly session that we're conducting to start trying to open the dialogue with both security and non-security professionals. So this conversation on a monthly basis is open to anyone who wants to join. Today we're going to be talking about security strategies and software development, particularly around what you might have heard as the common term shift left. I am not going to speak on this topic first because I tend to be the one that talks a lot. So I'm going to either randomly call on someone or have you guys jump in and talk about your experiences in that area. And then, I can help run answers. And we do have a poll here. Let me just start that one and launch the first one, which is really just trying to understand how many of the folks here are ISC2 members. This is a CPE session, so you should get a seat. You should submit it, or we'll submit it for you if we have your ISC2 number on file.
And if you do want to share it with us directly, we can always submit it for you. But
yeah,
it just saves a little paperwork for you.
Okay, great. So we have good representation of both non-ISC2 and ISC2, so thanks for that. And then we're going to ask you a question here. Oops, how do I ask that? Here we go. That's good. Wow, that's great. So we have 80% that say during design, which, maybe we should change the topic. Of what we're talking about. So who wants to start? Dave, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I was thinking with that also, like within the design stage, because I think we should probably just focus in on that, because that seems to be where everyone's doing it and probably the right answer as early as possible. Does that really look, do you start at the core of the features? Are you starting, there are many ways you can start with it. You could start at the code, you could start at the environment, you could start at the wire diagrams. But often it's like the threat modeling of what are the things I need to care about right now at the beginning? And then how do I continuously care about them? And that sometimes really depends on the expertise of the people and how much guidance people need to start thinking, well, I want it to work, but then condition for these people at these times in this way. So often when we're looking at it, I've typically look at the very beginning. When architecture is getting designed, when the wireframes are going live, you start looking at what are the different points of traffic moving in and out. Because typically it's that's the core thing. Whereas ingress, whereas egress, how do we secure those points to which groups? Where's the data at rest? How is it protected? But then really getting into the whole pipeline scanner. When people are committing code, how can they know as early as possible that they should try a change? And how quickly should they start doing the updates or the upgrades so that when the QA testers come in to check their work, they can check everything at that point rather than just, hey, I delivered the feature as requested as I understood it. So typically, as we're looking at the shift left, I think that's really the starting point for many engineers is within their IDE as they're committing code. But I think it also depends on who you are. If you're the architect, it's definitely in the Figma diagrams and the modeling earlier on in the process. So I think part of that might come down to which area of security or which part of the development process are people focused on. If they're focused on audit, that might be a little different than those who are guiding others for those feature deliveries or contributing to them. Often what I've think also is not only do you have to build it securely, but you have to think well in advance, how do I prove that I did it securely? Because people can easily build things securely and easily lock things down and very much limit things. But then how can you prove to someone else, especially a third party or someone else, an auditor, a concerned client, how do you prove that you did it right? And I've been reading a lot about the Move It vulnerability recently. And how did everyone have such confidence that that software should be publicly exposed to the internet without observation? It's kind of confusing that normally you'd monitor where is it going, what's connecting, how's it starting. But it really comes down to why do you trust something and how can you prove that you're trustworthy?
So I would ask you a question, David, on that comment is, should you trust anything at all?
You have to. I trust Google Authenticators doing the math right. I trust the power to get to my computer the way that I expect it to with my surge protector. Like there's trust. You just have to trust for specific reasons, specific cases.
Okay.
But you're always just shifting trust. Zero trust is such a confusing topic because I'm trusting that my directory system has integrity and it's properly validated me. I'm trusting that that all works the way I expect it to. And then I'm proving it in as many ways as possible. And that's where you layer in that security to see, well, how can I prove at each point that it's secure or that it's secure enough, I guess, is the main goal.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the operational considerations for solidly built software, resilient software, robust software, I think was the term we used a little bit before, like making the software not crash, making the software work right. Also kind of like verifying you're talking to the correct system in the correct way and those sorts of things. It can be security and just making it run well at the same time. Very rarely, I think, does security become like the only thing. It's like a bolt-on over here. That's why it's kind of easy to design it in if you have that discipline, because you should be thinking of all the things that can go wrong in the first place. And David, I wanted to sort of jump in on what you were talking about in design, or how early do you go? Like if you have a data governance strategy, a strong one, for example, that's a place a lot of people start. If you kind of have a data moving or whatever processing app, right? What you protect more, like if it's like, hey, you've got 5 pieces of critical information, 14 pieces of don't let it get out, and 10 more pieces of whatever information, right? That starts to already get you thinking in the mode of, okay, why do we need this piece of information? Where does it need to go? How long does it need to stay on a screen? That kind of stuff. As a practical matter, like if you're building a bank application, right? There's people who work at the bank using your app. So they're going to be conscious of, this is the right time to get that piece of information. And then we want it over here as soon as possible. And then I want to see it or whatever, right? Those sorts of things. So it's like what the user could eventually tell you in Shakedown, you should already kind of have an idea of, because you've done data modeling, because you know what you're doing with the app. So again, it's like 2 purposes, like kind of in one bundle if you're kind of doing it right. So that was just the comment I had.
It made me think of like with like web browsers, like the HTTP only cookie and the things like that. It's just new technologies, but doing the same thing. How do I prove that it
Right.
came from the right source, it's used by the right client? How do I trust it? And even now with JOT or the web token, you pass them around and you trust it's cryptographically signed, and you trust that math is really good. But it's really you can't encrypt certain things because then you're hiding the information needed by the source. So it's really balancing out the digital signatures for integrity, the confidentiality, and then I think it's the most important in the design phase, because you can have those conversations. You can get risk on board, you can get compliance on board and say, this is my understanding. Does it meet your understanding? It doesn't meet your tolerance. And then you can have a combined decision. So it's not like some cowboy in the corner is like, this is the right way to do it. We work together. This is our best answer. And probably there's room for improvement later based on the first implementation.
Yeah, just my point about trust, and is really, I think all of this really starts before you get into even the technology, right? This is not, these discussions around the threat modeling and the data management and data classification are not really technical discussions. They're more business discussions. And then you layer, I think from my perspective, it should always start with the business discussions first. and what the risk profiles are. And then you start talking. So if you really want to shift left, you should be shifting before you even start thinking about development, when you're in ideation stages, right? What does this mean to our model based on what our model actually is and what our risk profile is? Now, whether organizations are ready for that or not, I would say based on my experience, it's not, unless you bring it up, nobody else is going to bring it up. So that's why it's imperative for us as security professionals to bring it up and to get people thinking about it early, really early, when they're starting to think about a new idea or a new approach or a new market or any kind of area, not because we want to cause an issue or we want to stop or slow things down, but bring it up as another opportunity within that global opportunity to maybe have a differentiator, right? So there's lots of ways to talk about this and raise these issues in a way that can be positive and not considered a drag, right? Not another friction point, because you're just trying to you're trying to facilitate the process and anticipate the problems are going to occur if someone doesn't think of them now, right? So if they start thinking of them now, you spend a lot of time and money building and getting ready and everybody's ready to go, and then someone in the corner says, "But." I've seen that a lot. And then that's when everybody's really going to get stressed out and cause problems. It's going to cause a problem because if you're that person, there's an issue, and the later you wait to raise it, the worse that impact is going to be. So I would say you want to really shift, way to the left before technology even gets selected as a key part of this process.
Yeah, Ali, it's a. Oh, sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
I just had a thought and a question kind of along those veins, because I know I've seen this in my experience, but I just want to throw this out there, see what other people's experience have been, but what kind of challenges have you experienced in attempting to incorporate security early into a project's process?
I think you went on mute slightly early, or you were muted.
Oh, I'm so sorry. How much did you guys hear? Any of it?
Most of it. Just.
Oh, that was a stray click on accident. I was just meaning to say that, I've seen in my experience, there have been challenges in regard to leadership vision. I've seen challenges in regard to technology making it difficult. A lot of different variables I've seen play that part, and I definitely think that having the support, top-down support, is the biggest influence to overcoming them in my experience. But I was curious if anybody else had any thoughts or experiences they'd like to share.
I think the first two things that came to mind are, you need to solve the current problem. Like, if you start ideating implementation details too far in advance, you need to have the strategy, have the buy-in. We're going to do it securely. We're going to do this in the right way. But you can't start getting into the weeds too early on, or you're not going to hit the progress, and you have other issues to deliver. But the other, I think, is communication. How do you, one, ask the question to the right audience, and how do you gain the knowledge that they already have to build on? I think those are often challenges that I've seen, is communications and getting lost in other problems that are not as immediate as the current ones.
Scott?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so a lot of my experience has been in very large organizations, and sort of like as a flip coin, right? You have the business users coming to you and actually almost being unreasonable about data, right? Where there is data governance, where they are the data custodians, and they're like, hey, I need you, do not screw around with this. This has to be done right, has to be protected. I want to get it in on the screen, and I want this to go there, and I don't want to see it again. I don't want anyone else, I want to be able to protect this screen for just the people who use it. I don't want anyone else to see it, or whatever they're saying, right? It's like the whole reverse of that, right? It's like they're coming in with and you must do it like this, and you must do it like this, and you're like, okay, hang on a second. But you also talk about doing this thing 10 minutes later, and that doesn't work with what you just said, or whatever, right? it's like a completely different problem. I think that's it's kind of interesting to think of that way. And what I was thinking is a lot of these development projects that are larger, right? When you're talking about, when you get to the point where you're talking about what enabling technologies or sub technologies you're going to use, right? In other words, hey, we're going to use this commercially available product and layer on top of it, or whatever it is, right? Because we keep seeing these types of things come up when we talk about, we don't know exactly what, say, our open source component libraries include, or that's the obvious one because we keep getting that over and over again. The challenges involved with digging deep enough into that to know it, to know all the different things that are part of it, whether you can isolate it or not, whether you should be using it at all. I mean, I think we've all talked about that on numerous occasions, just in terms of current events, right? But identifying that, and I don't think because a lot of my experience different times has been not even software development, but system development, right? We're bringing in a product, we're trying to evaluate its security stance, and then, you know, time after time, I go into situations where my engineers or whatever are like, well, you know, I don't know what the company's doing, whatever they do, they do. I'm like, no, whatever they do, you install, and then you should be able to tell me what database platform they're using, if any. You know, what do they layer on top of? What Java libraries? Is it Java based? What are they using? How are they getting the app on the web? Did they custom build their own thing? Or are they really trying to assume something else in the OS that they can use? Do they have a Tomcat environment? What did they put in there? Just the fact that they give you an installer package doesn't end your, hey, I clicked next. It's like, no, and it's their fault if something goes wrong. It's like, well, you talk to any lawyer for 10 minutes, they're going to tell you it's not quite that clean. So we got to do our due diligence here and evaluate this. So, and it's roughly the same thing, right? If you're a developer thinking about what you're going to layer on top of, or even just, you know, just a systems person putting in vendor software, it's kind of the same problem. Like, how far deep does the stack go? What is in there? You know, is that even compatible with our environment, with the assumptions, right? You know, I got this one in the DMZ and it's going to be regularly hit and attacked. That software may not hold up to that, or whatever. You know, we even know it might not. So maybe that's not the right thing to put there. We got to put something else in front of it, or whatever it is. So, no, sort of my take.
So one of the questions that came up is someone's comment also, which I think is in line with your question, Mike, which is, why should we change what we have been doing if that's what you hear in your organization? And I would tell you guys that that's not just technology, that's not just tech, that's not just security, that's whether we should change our paper from purple to red. I mean, that the aversion to change is built into lots of cultures, organizational cultures. And so you're going to deal with that no matter what. And having a strategy for that typically means turning that question around to, why is that a benefit for the person who's asking the question? Like, you've got to figure out how to dodge that question or rephrase that question, because that's going to always be there. And if it's from a CEO or a CXO, it's probably because they don't have budget or they don't want to spend the budget. If it's from a VP or a frontline worker, it's because they don't want to change their process, or they don't understand the impact on their process or the benefit. So I would say you really got to reframe it. Otherwise, you're never going to get past that question. It's really impossible to say. You can't just say, you know, because, you know, like our kids would say, or tell them, you know, do you want to get, you know, there's reputation. There's all these terms we use: reputational risk, data risk, governance risk, compliance. They don't understand any of those terms. You got to break it down and make it understandable based on where they're coming from. So what you said, David, about communication, corporate culture in general is all about communicating and finding a common language. And as the technologists, we should be the ones, in my opinion, our approach, that we should be figuring out how to speak someone else's language and not try to get them to understand ours, because that's a large ask for a lot of people.
Trying to turn your corporate users into like tech savvy nerds is not going to happen. Yeah. They desperately want you to show that you could be a business person, almost universally, right? And sort of to sort of close this together, one of the strategies I use is I just talk about branding. I was like, what does our brand mean to the consumer? Like right now I work in a school district, so it's like I'm not selling a product, or am I, right? I mean, but I'll tell you what, if we get breached, I guarantee you there will be a branding impact, because there is some school choice in Colorado, for example. There will be a branding impact on us that we can't easily dodge if we're shown to be lax, if we're shown not to be doing what we're supposed to be doing. And that's different than like banks, insurance, you know, the list goes on, who are like pushing the fact that they're secure, like bank with us, we're secure, you know, buy from us, we're secure. It's becoming part of, you know, the value proposition of the offering. And if it's not, then you know, if you're in one of those companies that just isn't thinking that way, it's like, well, our competitors are doing this and we're going to get left behind. That's why we have to change, because we always change. That's what competition is. It's just, you don't want to do it because it's technology, but it's just like everything else. You know, we have to at least keep up with the other companies. And frankly, if we're positioned to make it a differentiator, we should. And we should be branding it, and we should be out there making them sweat it. If they can't change as well as we can, guess what? They're not going to be here, and we are. So that's.
Well, that was one of the things I was thinking about, and it came back, like, again, culture. Everything comes back to the culture. Like, do you have people want to take the responsibility to do their part the best, and not just say, hey, the next guy's going to catch the problem? But when I was looking at the question that came in from Morgan, it was, why should we change what we're doing? Well, how many people are happy with the technology and the delivery schedules and their expectations? Like, you can almost use that and say, well, if everyone's delivering perfectly above expectations, don't change. But if there's frustrations and there's room for improvement, this is a way that has been proven to work. So again, address the pain point. If there are none, don't change. But otherwise, I think the biggest things are speak to those challenges and say, this is how we make you happy. And then you always have regulations in the back pocket. Like GDPR is a motivator. That fee is noticeable.
Yeah.
That's the stick.
Yeah, I kind of along those. Oh no, yeah, I'm not muted. I thought I was for a second there. Kind of along that same vine, yeah. Not everybody in a company is going to be, you know, monetarily driven, but a lot of decisions do get made when you're able to explain yourself on bottom line. And that's one of the reasons why in the CSSP, for example, there's all those equations for return on investment and cost per incident and so on and so forth. And it's critical to really be versed with understanding how to take something that before RMF, risk was very much a gut feeling. Like, I feel this is a high risk, but we didn't have a whole lot to really kind of quantify that and explain that in a numeric sense. And things have really, I feel like, gone a long way as far as like the tools in our tool shed to be able to explain, you want to do this security thing, be it a new security technology that we need to be akin to, or a new attack vector that we need to account for, or whatever it might be. Just saying we need it, usually not enough. You need to be able to demonstrate why we need it, and more than just like, because I feel it's really bad. you need to be able to say, well, here's the potential impact. Here are case studies that we've seen of people that have had to pay ransomware or whatever. And that I think is a big way of turning heads and getting people on your side. But just like Scott was saying, you got to be able to speak the language. Otherwise, you're kind of just talking in the wind.
It's tough though. As the technologists, which are often introverts, they're expected to know the business value. They're also supposed to know like how to convey all of these things in the other people's terms. But you also have to be a salesman. Like, you have to be able to sell as with everything else. Like, it's not you want this pen. It's this is why you want the pen, and this is what will you do for it. That type of thing, because you got to sell the benefit and balance that out and understand your audience with most things. I remember speaking with one. I used to work at a company where we serviced a lot of different industries, and I was very surprised when availability was not on the radar of one of the senior people. They were like, "That's not a big deal." They're like, "We used to do things by hand. We call these people all the time." They're like, "Yeah, the computer thing doesn't work. We have that." And I was just surprised. I was like, "Wow, that had no traction whatsoever." But it made sense understanding the other person's position. I was like, "Oh, that's why you have all those amazing professional services groups."
And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but especially with everything that went down with Log4Shell, just over a year ago. I feel it's still kind of pretty relevant. When you have a system that you built from in a secure way, and then all of a sudden something comes in and completely disrupts what your security posture is. There's a new, in the case of Log4Shell, it was a huge vulnerability that was trivial to exploit to the point that script kiddies and automated tools could just wreck entire networks. And I definitely remember having to go through there when that was being discovered, and going through SBOMs and trying to figure out exactly what the risk aperture is, and then engineer solutions. What can we put in the interim as like a speed bump? What is going to be our long-term plan? Obviously patching, but what is going to be the process to kind of do a secondary and tertiary, just to make sure that we didn't overlook it. So I kind of talked a little bit about my experience with that particular problem, and I was just kind of curious if anybody else wanted to share experiences that they had where or strategies that they have for when there's an unexpected thing. How do you turn around and change your security posture on something that's already been built, already been developed?
Well, I think it all comes down to visibility. How quickly can you tell, is that running in my stuff? If you're looking at bill of materials is one thing. If you have a DevOps team that's out there saying, we don't use Apache or we don't use technology, whatever, that's great. Like, we don't have that anywhere. We've never heard of it. That's the best answer. But again, how do you prove it? How can you attest to it? And I think that's really the biggest challenge is usually visibility. How do I know what's running? Not even talking about the shadow IT, but what about the thing that someone put together 10 years ago is still running a back-end process? Probably before they had some of the layered protections. Although, again, anything that's exposed to the internet should have controls over the traffic going to and from sources. There should be more than like, well, it's open on 443 and 80, we're good. You would hope. But I was thinking outside of that specific, I think the ideal for security in architecture is, again, you have to prove everything, but chaos engineering. It's the ideal, like Chaos Monkey, like that Netflix put out, where basically it just goes around AWS, shutting down all of your stuff, deleting your stuff. If your stuff's resilient, you're good. I think that's the ideal, but I don't know many that want to get there. But that kind of approach works in so many ways. There's certain types of developers who will go in and say, well, I can do a test to prove the performance and throughput and that it only works in these conditions. Even like a new evolution beyond test-driven design. So it's always coming down to like, what do you think about this and why do you think that? Why are you confident that that is the actual answer? And can you build tests or things that produce artifacts to prove it? But we were super lucky with Log4j.
I would say with
Log4j.
So my comment on Log4j is, we're not a Java shop and we don't deploy any Java anywhere. So none of our clients were at risk in our platforms. But a personal story is I use a lot of APC products at home, and I use the enterprise ones. I don't use the ones that you buy at Best Buy. And until I went home and looked around, I had no idea that every single one of my APCs was running a Log4j instance for alerting and logging. So inventory, I think, the idea of, radical inventory is really important. You really need to know everything that's plugged in, whether it's plugged in virtually via running on a virtual machine or in a container or on your machine, or if it's actually literally plugged in the wall. that's part of your risk profile. That's part of your threat modeling. You can't just make any, like I said, you can trust but verify, like it's been brought up. Any assumption you're making is almost always going to be wrong. So you got to get assumptions out of the equation and make sure you're verifying everything that you need. We use, so for, someone asked about what product. So in our development lifecycle, we use a lot of tools right in the IDEs. We do threat modeling before we start doing any architecture based on the business rules and the business requirements. So we're doing manual threat modeling by going through with the business owners and trying to understand, things that they understand, as you said, Scott: branding, reputational risk, financial capital risk, human risk. We talk about those things with them and model them and help them understand what they are. But then once we get through requirements, and we're doing requirements, we're going through threat modeling, and that's a manual process. There's no magic to that. You've got to just do the work. And then once we get to, actual implementation, we use our experience with products and tools, right? We try to stick to, in our case, as many commercial products as we can, that we can rely on vendors and third-party testing. But we do use open source. And in those cases, we use, in our case, we use Sneak and we use GitHub Enterprise in the development process. So we're using 2 tools, not one. We don't trust just one. And you'll be surprised the differences. One will catch this and another will catch that. So by having at least 2, and then before we, as part of our build process, going into QA and UAT, we run static code analysis with a company called Coverity. It's built right into our build pipelines. So we're doing checks all along the way to make sure that when we get to the end and we get scanned by, all of our clients require third-party scans and third-party penetration testing, and we do our own white, black, and gray box testing with third parties. We don't want them to find anything. We want them to try really hard, and the stuff they find is usually low to no impact at all, because all that effort up front. I mean, developers, as they're coding, are being told, no, don't do that. That's not a good idea. It's right in the code. It's right in the development process that we have that happening. So, it's not cheap. But for us, it's worth it, because our reputation is really important and our clients' reputations are very important. And that's why we do it. That's the primary reason that we are ensuring that when we get to that end stage, we're not going to be surprised, because we've done the hard work. We've done the threat modeling. We've done the architecture. They understand the business requirements. They understand why we have to do all these things. I mean, we have customers that'll say, we don't want QA. If you can still believe that in this day and age. But it's just a matter of convincing them why it's important and what the benefits are going to be. So inventories, I think not everybody's going to do what we do, but I think that, the more you put into place at the top of the funnel, the better. You're never going to get a worse product. You're always going to get a better product. At least that's my experience in delivering platforms for 20 something years now. So I would highly recommend, if you're not doing it today, find a way to convince, to even just my recommendation, if you're not doing any of these things right now, which it sounds like everyone on the call is, just try one. Just get one in. Just get one process in at a time. Don't try to change everything. Just do one little thing. Show some benefits from that, or at least show what your findings are. And then you can start to add and improve and iterate against that. It's much easier to start with something very small and build than it is to try to go big and implement that all and get a success out of it.
Yeah, build on small individual successes that you can understand instead
Correct.
of a bunch of mixed bag.
Correct.
The only thing I would highlight is, it may not be as much a cost issue, because it's actually a cost savings just up front versus later. It's kind of like, I heard the car analogy of like, well, I can speed all the time and get there fast, but eventually I'm going to be really late to something. And so it's when you're going to pay. And also a lot of security comes down to due diligence and due care. If you're showing that you're doing the code scan, the pipeline, the build, the deployment, and someone still got through this and you have all these layered protections, then the industry can learn to do things better. But that's normally not the case. Normally the problems that we're seeing is horrible pass-through management, horrible exposure of things unprotected, poor visibility into network traffic. Unfortunately, those are the things that are the problems more than, well, the 0 days. I mean, it was surprising. Fortinet Barracuda, things that you expect to have been hardened, but nothing's perfect. And most software engineers doubt or not really positive that things work as well as people who are less technical.
And by the way, Fortinet has had multiple bad password vulnerabilities over the years, not just one,
Oh, wow.
multiple.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I counted, I believe, 7 or 8 in
that's
my
just
memory.
how
now.
anybody can still consider them a secure product just blows my mind.
Yeah.
You pay the monthly maintenance fee always.
So
Yeah, it's never mind.
Ali, some of the things that you were saying made me immediately just associate your process to DevSecOps. I'm going to go ahead and make the assumption that you're using that, and I've seen DevSecOps implemented to differing degrees of success, and I know that it's been a challenge, in my experience. And it definitely, like, DevSecOps is all about trying to get security in first, get the people writing the code thinking about it, getting it, security requirements identified early and tested, and so on and so forth. I was wondering if you or anybody else has any suggestions on how to make the transition to DevSecOps or implementation of DevSecOps more successful. Because I definitely know that from my own experience, it's been a challenge.
start small. Like I said, you got to start small. You got to let people get comfortable with what you're asking them. I mean, something like Sneak is super transparent. You're literally telling them, connect your IDE, watch for pay attention to what it tells you. I mean, it's super, super low friction for a developer to start using it. GitHub Enterprise, we use the Enterprise Edition and we use the Advanced Security. It's literally you read it, you review it, you push a button, it creates a pull request for you automatically that fixes the dependencies that are a problem. But of course, these things are not free, right? So, you gotta, it all depends on what your business model is and what your financial model is. Do you have the capital in the budget to implement these things, right? Not everybody does. So I'm the CEO and I'm a CISSP and I'm a CSSLP. So, I control the purse strings and I'm an engineer. So, it's a little easier for me, but my customers are Fortune 50 all the way to bootstrap startups, and they all deserve the best. I don't look at this as optional. We should be doing the best work we can possibly do, not because we were asked to do it, but because it's the right thing to do. So from our perspective, that's the way I look at it. My teams, they all get taught. You trust me, we hire new people and they're like, what do you guys do? I've never seen anything like this before. What's going on here? And we're like, well, it's just the way it is. Get used to it. I mean, that's just our culture here. You're not gonna, do that. So I would tell you, change as little as possible and get the most bang for the buck initially. Sneak for us was super easy to add on, even though we were already using GitHub Enterprise, right? So it was super transparent. It was a few clicks. It was easy to teach the dev team. It was one call, 10 minutes, show them how to turn it on. I mean, I'm not selling it. I'm not trying to sell the product, but if you were trying to do a very easy shift left, get going type of thing, those guys have made it ridiculously easy to do. And if you're using GitHub, you can turn on the free review. There's free stuff. You don't have to pay for advanced if you don't want. And that you can turn on by just checking a box on a repo, right? So there's a lot you can do today compared to 10 years ago or even 5 years ago that what's that Sonar Cube? That's an open source product. It's pretty good, right? It's pretty good. So you could throw that on a Docker instance. Oh, I hate Docker, but you could throw it on Docker or Kubernetes and you could plug it into your development pipelines and not even let the developers know and just take the reports and go say, hey, what are you guys doing? This is a problem. You could take that approach too. So there's a lot of ways that you could solve your problem. You just have to decide culturally, where can you go? Can you go direct and get the devs involved? Or do you need to start showing that these are the issues and start doing some training and say why. And most developers don't know they're writing insecure code. They don't teach that. It's an experience that you learn to write secure code through experience, right? It's like, take this example. You hire a junior plumber to do the plumbing in a house. You're not going to put him there by himself. You're going to take a senior person who's a master and have them train under that, because if they get one solder joint wrong, the house is ruined, right? That's exactly the same. You take a junior developer and have them writing important code without someone else mentoring or coaching them. What do you think's going to happen?
Right. Well, it's like everything else. It's like the beginner like learns how to do it right, and the advanced person can repeatedly do it right, but the expert knows how not to do it wrong, or knows how to recover from all their mistakes. They've already done that. They've learned and they've improved.
Correct.
And so that's the ideal.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think sharing those patterns is
GitLab
important.
also has the same ideas in it. So thanks, Chloe. I didn't know that. So we don't use GitLab. So yeah, that's great that they have that as well. That's where it should be, right?
Yeah. If you want to self-host GitLab, it's a good option.
Yeah, just a quick note on Sneak. I will say that Ali is a good example of modeling a very close to ideal or perhaps ideal situation, right? He is the leader. He's got the knowledge and experience in both the business and the technical and security sides. He can put it all together, and he does, which is great, but not always that common. So Sneak in particular, we've been using in our build pipelines where I'm working, but we only got it because what we had been using before was causing developers a lot of problems because it was updating once a month. And when those updates would come through, it would break a lot of stuff. And they had to go and they should have fixed it manually, but they kind of just like turned all those things off manually. So they didn't have to, so they could just get around the blocks. And so we replaced what that product was, I forget its name, with Sneak, because there was a way that you could kind of do that programmatically. Like you can say you could ignore certain things. So we did that. And I've been trying to convince people to start using it in the IDE. As Ali says, it'll just, it's basically like a plugin, and it'll kind of give you tips as you're writing code as you go. Seems like it's a low bar. But even that, it hasn't happened yet. And part of the reason is our team is really small, and we just have a ton of stuff to do. And we have both development work that everybody does and operations work that everybody does. And so that's a constant trade-off, right? When there's an ops fire, you got to put the fire out. It's not like, oh, we'll schedule that for the next sprint. It's like, this has to get fixed now. So that means other things get pushed to the back burner. And so we're in this constant state of triage, really. And, the holes just keep getting deeper and deeper. The tech debt keeps piling up. So even though it's relatively simple to implement on its own, context is really important. And that's the culture, the leadership, the priorities, trying to carve out a little bit of, positive movement in the direction you want to go, in this case, left. But it's not always easy.
Exactly. There are two things that outside of just the Sneak and that could also help in each of those challenges. The thing is like infrastructure as code, using Terraform, Ansible. So like, regardless of who's doing it, it's built the same way. They filled out the same form with the same fields, and they started with the same template. So that's an easy thing for someone to get done, because it makes everyone's life easy from the beginning. Like once you've organized it. But then the other thing is almost everyone's using a cloud, using secrets managers. Like we shouldn't be using password managers are for people. For businesses, you use secrets managers. You put the secret there, you call a variable, and then you don't have people with these secrets carried around, because that's horribly insecure. But that's the way you used to do it. I mean, things are evolution, but the easy answers now are either use a secrets manager, use a Terraform, Ansible, CloudFormation, build it from code, because then you have that visibility and you have immediate benefit across the board in terms of security, usability. Usability usually wins, especially at the end user.
Yeah, infrastructure as code has a lot of advantages, but I will point out that repeatability just means that. So
Yeah,
if
but you at least
you coded something that is insecure or inefficient or somehow kind of nutty, now you can make thousands of those at a click of a button. So repeatability has its advantages, but the question is, what are you repeating?
exactly. But then the thing is, if you do it 100 times, eventually someone's going to be like, "Hey, this isn't working right. This is done wrong. Let's improve across the board." And it's one change. But otherwise, it's hidden, and you're like, "Well, some guy wrote it on his own, and I don't know if he did it the way that we told him to." I hope so. So yeah,
Automation.
repeatability, maturity.
Yeah, automation is definitely a key to creating a secure baseline, because humans, we have always been the weakest link. I remember one of the networks that I was auditing. I just used a tool. We had a tool called Red Seal. And we used it just to find abnormalities across the networking devices. And we had a handful of networking devices that had poor a password encryption standard. That was crackable. And these were weird one-offs, something like, I don't know, 7 out of hundreds of devices, but it was like that because of a human error. And so being able to automate that and standardize stuff, yeah, you could definitely accidentally implement a insecure setting, but it also means through that automation and standardization that the solution is also just as quick.
Well,
It
it might
is.
be just as quick. It depends on the operational context, right?
If
So
you're
there are
deploying
some
things in
things that you can
space.
change on the fly, but there are other things that require like a reboot because it's a kernel setting, or you've hopefully your application architecture has resiliency built into it, so you can kind of roll through and take things offline and fix them. But kind of the blast radius of the fix definitely needs to be considered.
Absolutely. You got to think about those hard to update environments. I always think like medical devices, space things, underwater things. Like you got to find the right time for that. Most of the other things, you're like, oh, it's an AWS. There's redundancy. There might be a blip, but it depends on how quickly can it go from code to deployment. And if you're at the month cycle, that's much worse than if you're at like the 12 times a day cycle, which not everyone can get to, and most people imagine. But then it's all down to that consistency, repeatability, and I guess it comes back to that culture again. Do you have the people who are interested in doing it the right way and giving it the fair attention they deserve as the core thing that they're working on?
Yeah, and one selling point on automation and infrastructure as code is that efficiency, right? It takes a little more time up front, but you can get a lot more done with smaller teams overall. So
it's a lot faster.
Selling point.
Absolutely. It's a lot faster when you bring the next person on. Because yeah, one person, small team can do it, but when you onboard 2 people, you want to just give them like, here's the YAML file. Can you read it? Tell me what variables need to change. It's a starting point. So it saves time with scaling. So I guess a lot of this comes down to if you have a team of 3 people, you should do the same things, but it'll be different. If a team of 7 to 30 or over 100, it's dramatically different. And no one ever wants to hear, well, it was this person who was working that day. That's never the answer you want to hear.
Especially if they're no longer with you.
Right. Yeah, unless the person's in a great mood and praising, it's not a good starter.
So we're about 8 minutes left. what I'm going to do is, since there's a limited number of folks who joined today, I'm just going to add everyone in, and I'd like to hear from your points of view. You're not obligated to provide. I just want to hear what you think about the format and the topic, and if it was helpful to you, or any other thing you want to add is absolutely fine. Because we're doing this for you guys. So I guess, Chloe, you're unmuted. So how about, would you mind starting us off?
Okay, sure. Hey, Mike, I work with Mike actually, so this is why I'm here. Yeah, so as a working software assurance on programs, building in and basically making the case to software developers who, like, I absolutely agree. I have a computer engineering degree, and going through all the computer science classes, they did not mention a thing about software assurance, security, and it is something that you have to experience throughout your career. And so, at least in my role, I try to engage with the software developers as much as possible. And what I've discovered is this is another metric in which they can prove that their code is good quality. And that's one hook that I try to draw in, at least convince software developers that this is something that they should care about, that it adds quality to their code. And, it does. And this is like my experience, because, I was working mostly as a software developer, but I kind of got a kick out of reducing the amount of critical, findings in when I ran a Fortify report on my code, right? And almost kind of gamifying it is what I found is very useful, of giving implementing the tools within the pipeline and then giving an incentive to the developers to reducing something and fixing a bug or a vulnerability, or pulling out certain, do we really need this package? This seems to be a pain. And I don't think we use it anymore. And kind of getting them on board to align with, what they're looking for, to what, is aligned with software assurance.
Great, thanks. Did anybody else want to add to the conversation?
I just want to mention Morgan actually weighed in on Q&A, just to say he also works with Mike. So thanks, Mike, for bringing people to the game here, and that he found the topics useful. That's all.
Okay, great. All right. I think we could wrap up. If you guys, by the way, if you're unaware, we are the Boulder chapter of the ISC2. If you guys are not members, there's no charge or dues to join. And we are looking to continue to grow because our objective is to be as community focused as we can, and ensure that non-technical people are getting the help they need and the knowledge they need to be secure and to understand the risks in everyday life today from the perspective of cybersecurity. So that's our main mission. So if you're not a member, please consider adding yourselves to our member list, because we'd love to have you as we continue to build and grow. This chapter is really just getting started. So it'd be a great time to join if you want to have broader impact on the area. We cover Boulder County, Weld County, and Larimer County. So it's a pretty big area. And the more folks we can have to help, that would be fantastic. So that's my pitch in the last 2 minutes here. But if there's no other questions or no other comments to close out, we can end the call. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.